Forbes has declared that one long-held principle of being a smart taxpayer is now almost dead, and I'm going to tell you why it's even worse than they think. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. Here's an article from Forbes.com. It's from a gentleman named Bob Carlson, who writes, "New tax rule number 1, say goodbye to tax deferral." And it goes like this. It's hard to abandon long-standing rules of thumb, but sometimes circumstances change and it's necessary to change our thinking if we want to maximize our after-tax wealth. Now, some of us just decided to go where we're treated best and not worry about deductions and exemptions and after-tax wealth and just keep all of our wealth. But if you're going to stay in a high-tax country, you might want to heed this advice because indeed it is hard to abandon long-standing rules of thumb. Perhaps the oldest rule in the book, he continues, in the tax planning book rather, is to defer taxes whenever possible. Don't pay a bill until you have to is one of the first planning strategies many tax planners learned. Tax deferral is the foundation of most retirement plans. Current tax breaks and tax deferral of income are significant incentives for people to put money in traditional 401k plans and IRAs. Tax deferral is also why many people don't take distributions from those accounts until they're required. But circumstances have changed, and they are likely to change even more in the next few years. Those changing circumstances make tax deferral less attractive and even unattractive. I first argued, he says, that tax deferral wasn't always the optimum strategy after the Roth IRA was created and again after income tax rates were lowered significantly in the 2003 tax law. Many people have difficulty believing that long-term after-tax wealth could be increased by paying taxes today. That's why they don't open a Roth IRA or convert their IRA to a Roth IRA. Instead of relying on intuition or rules of thumb, I constructed spreadsheets, he says, such as my IRA conversion spreadsheet, to see the circumstances when it is profitable to pay taxes before you have to. And the circumstance when it makes the most sense to pay a tax early is when you're likely to face a higher marginal income tax rate in the future. Do you hear that? When you're likely to pay a higher marginal income tax rate in the future. Now, look out at the world. And what we've been telling you for the last almost 2 years now, more countries than ever talking about a wealth tax. They won't all do it, but some will. More countries than ever talking about raising taxes, raising capital gains taxes, sticking it to the rich, broadening the whatever they're talking about. Lots of conversations. We read the tax journals, we get the alerts, we do all this stuff every day. I've never seen so much about some of these taxes, quite frankly, nor have some of the tax lawyers and accountants and others we work with. And what that means is taxes are going up, partially because of what's been happening in the world recently, and countries don't have enough money to pay for it. They weren't prepared. And they're not concerned about being prepared because they know they can always sock you for more money. On top of the fact that it is very much in vogue now in Western countries to come after people who have accomplished something, who have become successful, who want to pass wealth along to their family, and to attack them as vultures, to continue to look for the next status of wokeness financially, where now it is that if you are a landlord and someone is paying you rent, shouldn't they own your property? That's what it's descended to in the Western world. And so in that climate, do you think that tax rates are going to go up? When you see tax rates that are relatively low by some of the post-war historical standards, do you think the rates are going to keep going down? Or do you think perhaps they would go up? And so what he's saying is, that's when you want to pay. And so the article continues, but I think you get the point. Now, I have said, and I'm not a financial advisor, so don't take my advice on this, but I've simply said in my own personal scenario, when I lived in the United States, I did not use a retirement vehicle because I did not want to trap my money in a vehicle where, sure, I got a tax deduction or I got some tax deferral, but I knew my money would be stuck there until a certain point in the future. And the two big myths about things like retirement accounts are, number one, well, your tax rate will go down because you'll have less money in retirement. What kind of a goal is that, by the way, if you're any kind of an astute investor, is to save your entire life, to take advantage of a rising stock market, cryptocurrency, whatever it is you invest in, and then 40 years later to retire and say, oh, well, I'm glad I have less money now. Why would you want to retire with less money? With so many places to invest well, that just never made sense to me. On top of the fact of, you know what, when the government's in control, I don't trust it. I don't trust the government won't raise tax rates. Oh, don't worry. Like, people just assume for 40 years they won't raise your tax rates. Like, the incompetent government won't raise your tax rates to make it a worse deal later. And so what Bob Carlson is saying here in Forbes is we don't want to rely on tax deferral anymore. Now, again, listen, this is not financial advice to you. But to me, if I'm evaluating whether I want to pay tax now, whether, let's say I'm selling my cryptocurrency, I'm selling my business, I'm selling stocks that have run up, I'm selling a home that maybe not my primary residence. I had a guy the other day, he owns 4 homes in the US. Only one can be his primary home. He's had some pretty significant appreciation in 3 of them. And I said to myself, well, if he doesn't plan to keep using those homes, and if he doesn't maybe trust the US and he wants to maybe take some of that money off the table at some of these market highs, and put it overseas, hey, listen, capital gains tax rates are probably only going to go up. Now might not be a bad time to cash out for a multitude of reasons. But this doesn't just apply to things like IRAs. It doesn't just apply to selling your summer beach house. It also applies to things like the Biden administration wanting to get rid of the 1031 exchange or severely inhibit the 1031 exchange, where you can buy real estate, accumulate value, sell it, and move that equity into the next property and defer the obligation. We've seen the reduction of deferral possibilities for companies who want to defer money, who want to accumulate retained earnings on favorable tax terms. That's been reduced. And so this idea that we're going to trust the government that, by the way, it wasn't that long ago, barely 100 years ago, introduced an income tax, 1%, 3%. Now it's like 37% is not enough. The same government that in 100 years managed to severely debase its currency and managed to drastically increase its tax rates, that routinely, and this is not just about one country, but routinely does not keep its promises to various entities, people, what have you, around the world, that uses eminent domain to take property, all these different things. We don't have to go through it all. We're going to trust them to say, listen, I'm sure that at 27 years old, when I retire at 65, as if that'll be the age when you retire, I'm sure that you will be honorable enough to keep the tax rates the same, keep the conditions the same, or in the case of some European countries, not just dig your dirty claws in there and take some of my retirement account, where some countries, we'll just borrow half of this, thank you very much. Borrow as in like, hey, can I borrow some toilet paper from you? You'll never see that money again. I don't understand why people do anything. And again, I'm not saying financial advice, don't put money in a retirement account. I didn't. But anything where you're relying on a government to keep the rules the same, especially when the rules are more favorable than they have been. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it's not in my lifetime, but my parents' lifetime, where you had tax rates that peaked at like 90% in different countries. That's where some politicians today want to go back to because they want more of your money to amass more power. You think tax deferral is a good idea in that kind of environment? No, tax deferral is a great idea when the rates are at 90%. They're still pretty high, but given that they are at relative lows, even though those lows are still way too high, I wouldn't put much confidence in the government. And they're always trying to chip away at these opportunities for deferral. So my suggestion is keep control of your money, whatever that means, to where even if you have to pay a bit more, having control to me is paramount. Knowing that I can move my money around. By the way, how many people wanted to invest in cryptocurrency, but the only free money they had back when Bitcoin was $1,000 was sitting in an IRA? Well, I don't want to pay the penalty. Imagine if you just had that money sitting around ready to invest, or imagine you had the money sitting around ready to invest in Tesla stock, or imagine you could have started your own business, but the money was tied up in an IRA. Now, maybe you can start certain businesses with an IRA, but you're doing yourself a disservice by not having control. Now, once you have control, then you go to the next step, which is going where you're treated best. And you say, okay, well, if I go somewhere where I don't have to worry about high tax rates, then I don't have to focus on deferral. If I live in Dubai, if I live in Monaco, if I live in Singapore, if I live in Panama City, if I live in any number of tax-friendly places, London for some people could be, Costa Rica could be, lots of potential tax-free places with exemptions or lump sum taxes or flat taxes or all sorts, no taxes. You can go and live there, and then you can stop focusing on ways to not pay the government and to do things and jump through hoops they want you to jump through, that they can later take the hoop back and they can stick you with it. Or even if you do, eventually you realize once you're in control, you just want to make organic decisions and not worry about deferral, because I can point to 3 or 4 different examples in just the last half dozen years of how just the United States has stuck to people who were relying on tax deferral. And with rates going up, they're going to stick it to a lot more people. And that's going to happen not just in the US, but around the world. So this is why going where you're treated best is so important. Now, I know not everyone with an IRA can or wants to move overseas. That's fine. But for those of you who believe that you want to have control over your life, go where you're treated best is better than tax deferral, because you set the tax rate that you're comfortable paying. If you want to pay 0%, you go there. People call me, by the way, say, you know what, Andrew, I don't want to pay 0. I feel good paying something. I'd rather pay it to a country I care about. How about I pay 5% or 7% or 10%? There are countries that will gladly take 5%. Come on in. We'd love to have your 5%. And then you can stop focusing on kicking the can down the road, start focusing on making good investment decisions for investment's sake, not for tax savings sake, and stop relying on this outdated advice that you always want to focus on deferral when the trend is now heading in the other way. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.